Dealings with the Dead, number 69. It is remarkable that such a genuine Quaker as William Penn should have sprung from such a belligerent stock. His father, as I have stated, was a British admiral, and his grandfather Giles was a captain in the Navy. William Penn may nevertheless have derived from this origin, and from his Dutch mother, Margaret Jasper of Rotterdam, a certain quality eminently characteristic of the Quaker, that resolute determination which the coarser man of the world calls pluck, and the Quaker calls constancy. This constancy of purpose in William Penn seems never to have been shaken. It appears in his refusal to doff his brim before his father, the Duke of York, and the King. It was manifested when being imprisoned in the Tower for printing his sandy foundation shaken, and hearing that the Bishop of London had declared the offender should publicly recant or remain there for life. He replied, he would weary out the malice of his enemies by his patience, and that his prison should be his grave before he would renounce his just opinions, for he owed his conscience to no man. This same constancy was signally exhibited during the disputation between himself and George Whitehead for the Quakers, and Thomas Vincent and others for the Presbyterians. Vincent had a parish in Spitalfields. Two of his parishioners went to listen, perhaps to laugh, at the Quakers. Like goldsmiths, scoffers, who came to laugh and remained to pray. They went in Presbyterians and came out Quakers. They were converted. At this, Vincent lost his patience, and seems to have become a persecutor of the cursed Quakers, and, as Clarkson states, all manner of unhandsome things of them, and their damnable doctrines. Penn and Whitehead invited Vincent to a public discussion. After much delay and evasion, Vincent consented. As every fowl is bravest on his own sterorium, Vincent selected his own Presbyterian meeting house as the meeting place for the discussion, and before the appointed hour filled it with his own people so completely that the disputants themselves, Penn and Whitehead, could scarcely gain admittance. They were instantly insulted by a charge suddenly made that the Quakers held damnable doctrines. Whitehead began a reply. Vincent interrupted him, and proposed as the proper course that he should put questions to the Quakers. He would put the motion, and as almost all present were of his party, it was agreed to, of course. He then put a question concerning the Godhead, which he knew the Quakers would answer in the negative. Whitehead and Penn attempted to explain. Several rose on the other side. Whitehead desired to put a question to Vincent. This the Presbyterians refused. They proceeded to laugh, hiss, and stigmatize. Penn, they called the Jesuit, upon an answer from Whitehead to a question from Vincent. Uproar ensued, and Vincent went instantly to prayer that the Lord would come short with heretics and blasphemers. When he had, by this maneuver, discharged his battery upon the Quakers, effectually securing himself from interruption, for no one would presume to interrupt a minister at prayer, he cut off all power of reply by telling the people to go home immediately, at the same moment setting them the example. The closing part, which especially exhibits that constancy for which the Quakers have ever been remarkable, cannot be more happily related than in the language of Mr. Clarkson himself. The congregation was leaving the meeting house, and they had not yet been heard. Finding they would soon be left to themselves, some of them at length ventured to speak, but they were pulled down, and the candles, for the controversy had lasted till midnight, were put out. They were not, however, prevented by this usage from going on, for rising up, they continued their defense in the dark. and what was extraordinary, many stayed to hear it. This brought Vincent among them with a candle. Addressing himself to the Quakers, he desired them to disperse. To this, at length, they consented, but only on the promise that another meeting should be granted them for the same purpose in the same place. Vincent did not keep his promise. He was doubtless fearful that more of his parishioners would be converted. Penn and Whitehead at last went to Vincent's meeting house on a lecture day, and when the lecture was finished, rose and begged an audience. But Vincent went off as fast as possible, and the congregation as speedily followed. Finding no other mode before him, Penn wrote and published his celebrated Sandy Foundation Shaken, which caused his imprisonment in the Tower as already related. And it's important to realize that religion shouldn't be a competition between leaders getting people to attend their service versus someone else's service. Another remarkable example of the constancy of Penn is recorded in the history of his trial before the Lord Mayor for a breach of the Conventual Act in 1670. Mr. Macaulay is pleased to say Penn had never been a strong-headed man. This is one of those sliding phrases that may mean anything or nothing. It may mean that not being a strong-headed man, he necessarily belonged to the other category, and was a weak-headed man. Or it may mean that he was not as strong-headed as Lord Verulam or Mr. Macaulay. I wish the reader would decide this question for himself, and for that end, read the history of this interesting trial as given by Clarkson in the first volume and 6th chapter of his Memoirs of Penn. If the evidences of a strong head and a strong heart were not abundantly exhibited by the accused upon that occasion, I know not where to look for them. A jury returned a verdict of guilty, speaking in Grace Street Church. Sir Samuel Starling, the mayor, and the whole court abused the jurors, after the example of Jeffreys, and sent them back to their room. After half an hour they returned the same verdict in writing, signed with their names. The court were more enraged than before. Mr. Clarkson says the recorder addressed them thus: "You shall not be dismissed till we have a verdict, such as the court will accept, and you shall be locked up without meat, drink, fire, and tobacco. You shall not think thus to abuse the court. We will have a verdict by the help of God, or you shall starve for it." After being out all night, the jury returned the same verdict for the third time. They were severely abused by the court after the fashion of that day, and sent to the room once more. A fourth time they returned the same verdict. Penn addressed the jury, and the court ordered the jailer to stop his mouth, and bring fetters, and stake him to the ground. Friend William, for an instant, merged the Quaker in the Englishman, and exclaimed, "Do your pleasure, I matter not your fetters." On the 5th of September, the jury, who had received no refreshment for 2 days and 2 nights, returned a verdict of not guilty. Such was the condition of things at that day that, for the rendition of that verdict, the jury were fined 40 marks apiece and imprisoned in Newgate. Penn was, at this time, 25 years of age. The peculiar position of William Penn at the court of Charles and James II may be explained without laying at his door the imputation of being a time server and a man of the world. Between the latter monarch and the Quaker, there existed a relation akin to friendship. Penn, in keeping with his Quaker principles, was forgetful of injuries and mindful of benefits. It is impossible to say how long he would have remained in the Tower when imprisoned there, though the agency of the Bishop of London, had he not been released upon the unsolicited importunity of James II, when Duke of York. When the Admiral, his father, was near his end, he sent one of his friends, says Mr. Clarkson, to the Duke of York to desire of him, as a deathbed request, that he would endeavour to protect his son, as far as he constantly could, to ask the king to do the same in case of future persecution. The answer was gratifying, both of them promising their services upon a fit occasion. perhaps, it would not be going too far, with Mr. Macaulay's permission, of course, to ascribe that personal consideration which Penn exhibited for Charles and James, a part of it, at least, to a grateful recollection of their favors, to his father and himself. Titles and phrases, says Mr. Macaulay, against which he had often borne his testimony, dropped occasionally from his lips and his pen. I rather doubt if the recording angel, who will never set down aught in malice, has noted the unquakerish sins of William Penn in doing grammatical justice to personal pronouns. This truly is a mighty small matter. If Penn was not so particular in these little things as some others of his brotherhood, his birth and education may well be considered. He was not a Quaker born. His residence in France may also be taken into the account. He had contracted, says Clarkson, a sort of polished or courtly demeanor, which he had insensibly taken from the customs of the people, among whom he had lately lived. In the matter of the hat, even Mr. Macaulay will never charge William Penn with inconsistency. In Granger's Biographical History of England, 4:16, I find the following anecdote. We are credibly informed that he sat with his hat on before Charles II, and that the king, as a gentle rebuke for his ill manners, put off his own, upon which Penn said to him, "Friend Charles, why dost thou not put on thy hat?" The king answered, "'Tis the custom of this place, that never above one person should be covered at a time." This tale is told also in a note to Gray's Hudibras on Canto 2, 225, and elsewhere. And one of the things about that sort of thing is, like, for example, the Bible, women are supposed to have their heads covered if they are to pray. Men are supposed to have them uncovered. And, well, the uncovered thing is that's a Christian gesture. But the idea that you have to take off your hat and bow and salute and stuff just to another person of different rank. You can respect the rank without, doing all that stuff.